Well, so welcome everyone to the second of TIAH's webinars focused on business excellence. It's great to have everyone with us. It gives me pleasure to introduce today's headline speaker, Neil Fedden, the Managing Director of Fedden USP and an expert on lean management. Neil, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Background of 30 years of implementing lean and doing continuous improvements. Started off in the automotive industry, in particular Japanese automotive industry. And then for the last 15 years, running my own business, working with agriculture and horticultural companies.
Brilliant. And we've also got Michael Blanche with us, who is a first-generation farmer and starting his lean management journey as well. So we'll hear from him a little bit later on in the session. But I don't know, Michael, if you want to say anything else about yourself.
I'm very dull. I don't have any. I'm a farmer, cattle and sheep farmer, tenant farmer near Perth in Scotland, and I've worked for QMS, I've worked for SAC. These are all Scottish organisations, and I've been I'm still an agricultural consultant. So that's
brilliant. And later on, we will also be joined by Jamie Butler of Meon Springs, who has been using lean management for many years. So it'll be interesting to hear from him as well. And I'm your host. I'm Linda Christofferson. I am the membership manager here at TIAH. So just before we begin, I'll just run through some housekeeping. The session is being recorded, and that recording will be shared with all of the registrants of the webinar a few days after the event. All attendees are on mute and have their videos off, but if you want to ask questions, please do so using the chat function, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can at the end of the session. We will keep those questions anonymous, and finally, the webinar will end promptly at 1:30. And that's it. So thank you, everyone. I will now hand over to Neil.
Great, thanks, Linda. So basically, session today, we wanted to give you something to walk away with, something to take away. Something that you could actually go back and actually start using on the farm. The theory of anything like this, lean or Six Sigma, continuous improvement, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to looking at productivity improvements. Basically, it's all about applying it and getting stuck into actually applying it within your own business. So, what I was very conscious of is it will give you lots of practical examples. So we've chunked it down into the very basics, but the idea being is that we'll hopefully give you what you need to go away and at least give it a try. And that's what we've got Michael on for. Michael's going to talk through some of his own experiences of trying it on farm. And as Linda said, Jamie, who's been doing it quite a few years now, and now he's sort of like wrote that into his strategy, basically. He's now got it into his business documents and his business strategy. So what we'll go through is a little bit of what lean is. Sometimes it's misunderstood as a concept, so just clarifying what it actually means and where it's come from. Something called 7 wastes. And then talking through how you identify these wastes within the operation, and then how you go about actually eliminating these wastes from the operation. So we use techniques called process maps and waste walks and string diagrams. So we'll just take you through some practical ways of actually going back on farm and actually applying these ideas, and then how you actually take the ideas and actually convert them into actions and ultimately improve the performance of your business. So, and we've got lots of case studies at that point. So we've got lots of examples where people have gone away and actually applied this to their own operations. And then, as I said, Jamie and Michael will talk us through their own particular examples and experiences. So going into what lean is, lean, as the name suggests, it's a business process that hasn't got much waste within it. And what you see down on the left-hand side, what abbreviates to Tim Woods, is the classic waste that you find within an operation. So that might be things where you're doing transports, where you're moving the stock and moving materials around the operation itself, either agriculture or horticulture. Inventory might be where you've got too much stock. So you've got too much stock of raw materials, or you've got too much livestock within the operation, more than what you can actually sell to the end product or end customer. Movements of people, it's where you've got people walking up and down trying to find things, trying to actually carry out the operation itself, and fully appreciate. And I think Michael will illustrate this as well with his particular waste walk. Some of the distances that you cover within your industry, they can be quite large, and it's really just challenging, is the layout of the operation itself the best to reduce down the amount of movement of individuals. Waiting and delays, so that could be people waiting for access to tractors, capital equipment, or waiting for machines to be set up. So stood there and idle, waiting for some action to take place before they can get on with doing their particular job. Overproduction, as it suggests, is producing more than what you can sell. So having too much stock that you can't then sell to the end user or the end customer. Overprocessing, that means going over and above the specification, so doing more than what's required within the operation, which doesn't actually increase the value of the product itself. And I've got a few examples that I'll talk through as we go through the case studies. But it might be things like, for example, in horticulture, where they're cleaning off the pots to sell to the garden centres, and they might spend too long cleaning off the pots, more than what's actually required by the end user, the end customer. And defects are where you haven't met the specification. So an example might be in the pork industry. You might have been penalised for a shipment of pigs that have got too much back fat. The back fat of the pigs is too high, and therefore they've suffered a penalty. Or in dairy, it might be that the bacterial count is too high within the milk, and therefore you suffer a penalty for that. So it's basically where the product doesn't meet the specification of the customer. And those 7 wastes, when you've got those 7 wastes, you're not getting the most out of the skills of the individuals within the operation. So the theory is lean is you reduce down the amount of waste, and what that does is frees up capacity for the people who've got the skills and the technical knowledge to actually do what you're paying them to do, basically. And when you analyse the process, when you do a waste walk, when we do string diagrams, what you actually find is only a very small percentage of what you actually do adds any value in the eyes of the end customer. It's only somewhere between 5 and 20%. The vast majority of it is waste. So by focusing on the waste, reducing that down, basically you free up more time for the value add, which is ultimately what you get paid for. And the other additional thing within that is it tends to be the waste that cause people most frustrations. So by focusing on eliminating and reducing those waste down, they're the things that cause frustrations within the job on a day-to-day basis. So hopefully by reducing them down, you end up with a happier crew of people within the business as well. So business benefit and hopefully a happier workforce. So just going through on the next slide, which is basically how we go about identifying these wastes. The problem you've got within a business, especially if it's your own business, you've probably been carrying out the operations a similar way, in the same way for quite some time. So after a while, you stop seeing the waste, and it just becomes the normal operation itself. So we use some techniques to almost sort of like snap you out of that and get you to challenge every single element of the process itself. One we use is process maps, which we use post-it notes, and we normally sit down. First thing that we normally do, we sit down on the usually on the kitchen table of the farm itself, and we start writing down on post-it notes every element of that particular process and that operation that we want to focus in on. So that might be a milking operation, it might be a feeding of the stock, it might be a lifting operation in horticulture, a picking of fruit operation. So we'll map it out from end to end. We'll understand all the times and the distances that are involved. And then what we'll start to do then is to look at the business metrics, business performance. So where are your costs within the business? How do you measure the business itself and the performance of the business? So we'll put them on, overlay them on top of the process map, so we can start to see, where are the problems within the operation and how do they link to possibly some of the waste within the process itself. So that's normally what we start off. We start off with process mapping.
And how long does that process take just to do this post-it note exercise?
Usually it's between 2 to 3 hours.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
yeah, you can do it quite quickly. So you normally do, if you're going to look at the whole business, you're doing it at quite high level. If it says, actually, we know where the problems are. The problems in dispatch, when it comes to actually dispatching the fruit itself, the vegetables, that's where we're having our issues. Then we'll zoom into a lot more detail. We'll look at that particular problem process. But roughly speaking, around about 2 to 3 hours. And the key to it, which makes it a richer process, is to get as many people as possible involved in this. The picture we've got here, it's only a small family business, so we only had 2 people involved. Some of the business we work with, it's been 10 to 15 people have been involved in the process mapping for a larger business.
That's great.
And then once you start to identify where the problems are, this is going into the next level of detail. So this one, we were looking at the feed within a beef farm, and we're looking at the feed process. What we do is we normally get a layout of the operation, or a plan of the farm itself, and the red lines that you see on that little diagram on the right hand side, as we've been walking through the process, we actually draw onto the plan the lines that are taken and the route that's taken as part of that feed process. And every time you take a route, you draw a separate red line. So the more red lines you start to see, the more traffic is occurring around that particular part of the process. And what you're trying to challenge as part of this is the amount of transport and the amount of motion, those 2 wastes of transport and motion. You're challenging those because they tend to be the biggest in agriculture and horticulture, because you've got usually quite large sites. So by focusing on those 2 things, that's normally where the biggest benefits come from. So that's why we use this technique of string diagrams to just open the eyes to how long some of these processes take and what sort of distances are travelled within them. So that's what we start off with. Once we've done the process map, we then go down to a string diagram.
And do you find people are surprised when you do this exercise, just how many miles almost they're doing in a day?
Yeah, definitely, because if you think about it, we'll do the string diagram and we'll probably do it as part of the process map. And so within the first 2 to 3 hours, we've drawn out every element of a particular process. And normally when people are doing the job itself, because they're within the process itself, they don't see it as an issue, they don't see the waste. It's only when you step back like this and you look at a plan and you start writing down everything that happens, normally it's very much of a surprise. And you can see from some of the figures that we've got on the waste walks, some of the distances can very quickly rack up to quite large distances.
Yeah.
And it's similar sort of thing. So again, kitchen table. We've started to do a process map. This one's from cereals. So we're looking at the drilling process, actually putting the seeds into the ground. So we've mapped out on the left-hand side. So you can see all the yellow post-it notes, which are the process steps. And then the pink ones are the problems that they've started to identify. So those 8 wastes that I talked about earlier, they've started to identify those wastes within the operation. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the string diagram. And you can see there's a heavy concentration of red lines right in the middle of the diagram of the site plan. And that's when they're filling up the driller with seeds. So there's a lot of transportation going backwards and forwards where they're carrying seeds and actually used it to fill up the driller. So that became the focus of all the, that was obviously a problem. There's obviously quite a bit of transportation and motion involved around that. So that became then the focus of the improvement activities, to look at what we could do to reduce down that travel time. And this one is similar sort of thing. It's the feed process for a dairy farm. And what this illustrated was the amount of travel that they were doing to the very, very top part of the string diagram on the right hand side. So you can see there's a very long leg of red lines that goes to the very top of the site layout that you can see on there, and that's where the young stock was. And what they found is that that basically a building had become available. They positioned the young stock because the building was available. What they hadn't fully appreciated is what the impact was having on the travel time around the farm and the amount of trips that they had to do to that particular young stock. So they started thinking through what they could do to relocate the young stock. On the right hand side is where they're doing they're picking up the minerals. So they're picking up the minerals for the actual feed part of the process. And what they started to do was think about where they could store those minerals closer to the actual position of where they kept the tractors overnight and the silage pits, and therefore they could actually reduce down the amount of travel to actually get the minerals. So they bought some temporary storage and they tried it out to see whether it did actually reduce down the lead time for the process. And once they'd satisfied themselves that it did, they actually bought some more permanent storage, and they relocated the mineral stores within the actual tractor store itself, which is down the bottom right hand side of the diagram. So that's how you're using these types of analysis to start thinking through what kind of things can you do to reduce down the amount of distance travelled, basically. Now this is fairly busy slide. What
looks scary, Neil. It looks scary.
yeah, it is a bit scary when you go into detail as well. So this is where you've actually written down on the post-it notes all the elements involved within the feed process. So you've got there where you're going to collect the JCB, turning the JCB on, going to connect to the shear grab, cutting the silage, and getting it into the grab itself. So you've got the elements of the actual job, and then what you've got alongside that is the amount of time it takes in minutes. So how long does it take to actually do that activity? And the next column then is how many people are involved in doing that activity. And then right in the middle of the actual spreadsheet, it's got distance. So how much distance is actually travelled as part of this as well. So we record down the meters travelled within the operation. So we're recording down all the different steps. We're recording down the time that's involved. We're recording down the distance involved. And then what we, on the right-hand side of this waste walk, you can actually start to see where we've started to identify what type of waste it is. So you can see right-hand side, there's one there called transportation, and that nearly every single step going down that particular column has got a 1 against it, which indicates the majority of the waste was linked into transportation. And this is the one that we did from that string diagram previously. So this is where we're starting to collect now the evidence and how much time is actually lost due to the layout, the poor layout of the operation itself. So this is what we call a waste walk, where we're starting to collect this particular data. And on this one, you can start to see the distance. I said it soon clocks up the distance travelled. So 8 kilometres basically as part of this one process. They were walking 8 kilometres or travelling 8 kilometres, and it was taking them just short of 3 hours a day to actually carry this out. So because it was a daily process, then obviously if you can make some improvements on this one, it's going to have quite an impact on the actual process itself.
That is a lot of time.
Yeah. And then we part of the analysis, we say, well, how much time is actually spent putting the value add, actually putting the feed into the trays itself to get them to the feed face for the cattle. And only 7% of that 3 hours is actually spent actually putting the feed into the bins themselves. 93%, so the vast majority of it, is actually spent just actually moving the materials to get them closer to the bins and actually put them into the bins. So by doing this kind of analysis from the waste walk, we then start saying, well, what's the amount of value add and what's the amount of non-value add? And then we can start thinking through what kind of things can we do to reduce down that 93%.
That's a pretty stark number as well. So obviously there's, huge room for improvement, which is great.
Yeah, and it's quite a harsh metric. The way we analyse it, it's quite harsh, and it's designed to be harsh. It's meant to open your eyes and see as much waste as possible. And then it's a question, and you can't eliminate all the waste, obviously. You won't be able to have a farm with 0 meters travelled. It'd be a fantastic site if you could, but you're never going to get to that situation. But if you can reduce it by 10%, if you can save 10% of 20 minutes out of that 3 hours a day, that soon starts to add up. And if that 20 minutes can then be used to spend looking after the cattle and spending more time looking after the cattle, spend more time picking fruit and more time lifting vegetables, then obviously that's where you start to increase the amount of value within the operation itself. So this similar sort of thing, this is on a dairy farm, so looking at the scraping out of the actual dairy farm itself. So yeah, and this is from Jamie's farm. So Jamie will probably talk through and refer back to this. But we actually physically walk the process when we're doing these waste walks. So we'll actually follow, we walked 8 kilometres when we did the waste walk on the previous example from the beef farm. So, and then what you're trying to do as you're doing it, on the right hand side, you've got the remarks. So as we're doing this, we're talking to the people that work within the operation, and we're asking questions about, why does it take so long, and what issues you're having. And they started to identify where they couldn't find brooms, they couldn't find scrapers. Some people were putting too much sawdust down, more than what was needed. The distance to actually get the sawdust was too far. So all the little micro frustrations that occur during this operation, we're starting to record them down, and that's what feeds into the next stages of thinking through what we can actually do to actually improve it and make it a simpler process. And that's what this slide's all about. Because as I said earlier, obviously you can't fix everything. You can't fix every single waste within the operation. So you've got to prioritise. And sometimes when we've done the waste walks, you may end up with 30 problems that you've identified within the operation. So what we then start to do is to actually grade these problems. And what we do is we look at them, and on the right-hand side, you can see the post-it notes, which are all the ideas that have come out of the waste walk and the problems that have come out of the waste walk. And then we grade these problems based on how easy they're going to be to fix. So is it easy to fix or is it hard to fix? And if we do fix it, is it going to be of low benefit to the business or a high benefit to the business? So basically, how much time is it going to save? And hopefully what comes out of this, and thankfully we get quite a few, are things that are easy to fix, relatively simple, and hopefully will generate a high benefit for the business in terms of shading time or shading distance off the operation itself. So and they're the ones you start off with. You start off by focusing on those ones. Once you've started to tackle some of the easy things, the confidence grows within the team to actually do more ambitious improvements. You start to create a bit of capacity because busy people. Normally trying to create time to do improvements is the biggest challenge. So the first improvements you do, the easy ones, hopefully create a bit of capacity to do some of the bigger improvements, some of the longer term stuff that possibly the business has been wanting to do for quite some time. So that's when you then start to move on to the harder to implement but higher benefits within the operation itself. And the one from the beef farm, this example here, the thing that they'd identified is how much distance they'd spent actually moving the feed clamp out into the actual fields, and they started trialing just putting bales into the field itself to reduce down the distance they would travel during the operation. That worked well. They quantified how much time was spent, and then they actually rolled that out across the operation itself, and that managed to reduce down the contractor costs. So it was a direct saving onto the bottom line of the business. And again, it was a problem that they hadn't seen before in the past. It become part of the normal operation. It's only when they step back from being busy people and doing the task every single day that they started to appreciate just how much time they were losing because of the way they were carrying out the process.
Yeah, wow.
And this is the cycle that we talk about within improvements. It's Japanese plan, do, check, act. Sometimes you'll hear it called Kaizen. Kai just means change. Zen means for the good, so change for the good and change for the better. And it's all about these little tiny improvements that you can make within the process. So you come up with the ideas and you plan to trial them. The do is you carry out the trials to see whether they do make a difference or not. You then record the times. You go back and you do your waste walk again, and you see whether it's actually saved your time. We think it's going to save time, but has it actually saved this time? And then once you've found out that it does save you time, you then think about, well, how can we now document this? How can we now capture this? So this becomes a new way of working, and everybody works this way within the process. And you basically keep going through this cycle. And this is what you're trying to instill. This is people talk about lean mindset. The lean mindset is when you've got everybody in the operation constantly challenging the way you're doing things and just questioning, is it lean? Is that waste? What can we do to get rid of that waste within the operation? And once you've got that, that's when you start to make some fundamental differences to the operation, to the profitability of the operation itself.
I guess part of the trick is that checking back to see what you're doing is actually making a difference. Because I think if it's 1%, you may not notice it, but I guess if it's documented and you can see the changes over time, I think that's probably the motivating factor, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it's the fear. This is what I was saying on this slide on the left hand side. It's that theory of lots and lots of small 1% gains that actually make the difference, because they start to compound. They start to add up quite rapidly once you start to get to drive these through. So rather than one big improvement, you're looking at lots of small, simple improvements, which are easier to implement, but adding them together actually make quite a big difference.
Yeah.
And this is just some examples of this. These little 1% gains. So this one's from a pig farm, and they were basically taking the straw bales from a central storage point, and they were taking them out to their finishing sheds, where they had the pigs in the finishing sheds. And when they actually did the analysis, they realised just how much time was spent going backwards and forwards. So it's 15 minutes per trip, and they were doing quite a number of trips per day. And the team that were doing this analysis, they came up with this idea of, look, why don't we just get a trailer, and we can move the trailer into the middle of the sheds, and in that way we can reduce down. We're only doing one trip, and then we can reduce down the number of small trips to get the bales. They actually quantified how much time would they save. So it saved £1,370 per year. And then somebody came up with the suggestion that there was actually a spare trailer that they could use. So they actually managed to find a trailer within the farm that wasn't being used, and they actually deployed that trailer. So it didn't actually cost them anything to do this particular improvement. But even if they'd gone to buy one for £2,000, it had paid itself back within 18 months.
Perfect.
And this is the one that a lot of people always resonate on. Top right hand side, the amount of time people spend walking around trying to find tooling to actually do repairs on the farm itself, carry out maintenance. So the top right hand side, again, this is from a pig farm. They came up with a suggestion, look, why don't we just get the tools that we need to do the job? We put them up on a board. Each shed has got a shadow board where they've got the tools they need. So rather than calling out the maintenance person to travel out from the central farm location to carry out the repairs once it's broken, why don't we keep a set of tools, and that way, as we start to see things are starting to wear or starting to break, we can carry out some remedial repairs with the tools that we've got, and therefore prevent it becoming a major breakdown or an expensive breakdown. And they actually implemented this. I think it cost them £1,200 to get the tools they needed to do the job, and it saved them something like £24,000. It managed to knock off 10% from their maintenance bill. It's quite a large pig farm, as you can probably imagine, so it managed to save them £24,000 over the period of a year in maintenance costs. But that's not even including the labour of somebody having to wait because the machine's down, wait for that machine to be repaired.
Amazing. And such a simple little trick, isn't it? Just to have this on display and ready so you know what you've got.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people, they like visual things like this. You can see it. So it's got quite a feel-good factor about it as well. The one on the left-hand side is
sorry,
that's all right. The one on the left-hand side is from a horticultural company. So this is for potting, for ornamental plants. The left-hand side of those two pictures, you can see the before. So they come to do a changeover on the potting machine itself. All the tools, all the drills that they needed, and the die plates we needed to do the changeover when they were changing over sizes of containers, they were scattered around all over the place. You had 4 people on this machine, and it'd be down 15 minutes. So it adds up to an hour labour time. And they may be doing this every hour. So every hour of operation, they'd spend 15 minutes actually doing a changeover and a setup. So you can imagine how that multiplies up over here, how much time you can lose on that. And what they simply did, same sort of thing again, put a shadow board up. And what they did as well is they colour coordinated it. So they painted all the different dyes, different colours, and the different drills, different colours. So it made it much easier to actually match up the tools that they need to do the actual changeover itself. Particularly when you've got temporary labour coming onto these machines, quite often you guys are probably in a similar situation where you're having to bring in temporary labour. So it was quite a neat way of making sure everyone was trained and skilled to carry out these particular operations.
Right.
And then the most important thing, once you start to do your improvements and you start to achieve some improvements, you've got to standardise to stop those improvements slipping back. So we always talk about standardisation, so documenting it and capturing it. And the next slide shows the best way that we found of doing that, of actually capturing the best way of working within the operation itself. And actually we do a lot of videos. So we just use a simple iPhone. So we'll use an iPhone, we'll video the operation the way it should be working, when it's working at its best. And we normally put them onto a WhatsApp farm group. So that way people can access the video. They can look at the best way of setting up that piece of equipment, or setting up that potting machine, or connecting a driller to a tractor. What's the best way of doing it? They can watch those little videos, and they're very informative for informing people what's the best way of carrying out this particular operation. And in this particular example, we actually used it for identifying waste as well. So we simply, using an iPhone again, we videoed somebody who just joined the business and some experienced operators within a propagation process within horticulture. So they're basically propagating seedlings into trays to grow them on. And what you can see, the number you can see, so bottom right hand side, the number 11, which was a new person that come into the business. Top left hand side, you've got 23. So basically that's the number of operations they carried out in 15 minutes. So we took 4 videos, we stitched the 4 videos alongside each other, and then we analysed the hand movements to see what an experienced person was doing compared to somebody who just joined the business. And you could start to see the subtleties of where they carried the seedlings and where they held the seedlings to reduce down the amount of hand movements they were doing. And that's what allowed the experienced people to get 23 in 15 minutes compared to 11. So they then converted this into a training video, and anyone new joining the business, they could show them this video and hopefully train them up and get them up to speed quicker. Another example we had was within a tomato picker. Same sort of problem. New staff had come in at the start of the season, and it takes about 6 weeks to get them up to speed. So what they started to do from the previous year is video the best operators, the ones that worked at the quickest rates, and then analyse that in more detail, and then converted that into a training video. And what you could see the more experienced operators doing, the way they hold the fruit, they hold more fruit in their hands. In a certain way they can carry the fruit, which can be trained, which reduces down the amount of times they've got to travel backwards and forwards to the actual picking cart. They actually use their hips to move the cart rather than their hands, and that way they can keep picking all the time. And you can actually drop the fruit by 30 centimetres without bruising it. So they actually started to see that by dropping the fruit, that could speed up the operation as well, without any detrimental impact on the quality. So they were all things that you could capture in a video that you could then pass on to new people as they joined. Just a few examples from dairy. So we looked at put a camera on the side of a cow shed, and we were looking at how long we were talking to a vet, and a vet explained to us the perfect cow day. You know, how long should the cow be lying down for? How long should the cow be ruminating, socialising? How much time should they spend in the milking parlour in order to maximise the yields from the cow? And I think the cow operates best. It adds more value. It lies down for 3.5 hours a day. So we actually put a camera on the side of the shed, and we actually analysed the amount of time that the cow was lying down. And one of the things was very evident: there wasn't enough space for the actual cow itself in some of the beds. So by moving, there was a bar at the front of each of the housing beds. By moving that bar, it could basically give more space for the cow to allow the cow to lie down. We then went back and checked the cameras. You could actually see that the cow was lying down for longer, and we basically got an extra yield, which mounted to £25,000 a year for this particular dairy farmer. So this is carrying out the same analysis, but instead of carrying it out on the person, you're actually carrying out the livestock, carrying out the analysis on the livestock and looking at how to improve the amount of value add that the cow can make to the operation. And I think this is the last one. This is a milking parlour. So we were looking at the milking process. We were looking at how long does it take to milk the cow. And as we were doing this, what we could actually start to see is the clusters weren't releasing quick enough. And that meant the farmer and his wife was constantly going backwards and forwards up the milk parlour to reconnect up or put the clusters back onto the cows as they came in. And when we actually looked at the actual clusters, you could see that the amount of milk that they were drawing down, it was only for a small percentage of the amount of time that the cluster was on. And by doing a bit of problem solving, we actually managed to see that it was down to the floor setting. So basically when the floor drops, as some of you guys probably know, as the floor drops to a certain level, that should release the clusters, and that setting wasn't quite right. So we adjusted the floor settings, and that managed to release the clusters within a shorter time, which then meant we could reduce the milking time down from an hour down to 30 minutes. The farmer was very experienced. He'd just not looked at it in that level of detail because he was busy. It's only when we sat down with him and we showed him the analysis and what the analysis was showing from the waste work that he started to fully appreciate just how much time was being lost on this.
Amazing.
The action plans, when you start to come up with your ideas and what you can do to improve it, we normally get a whiteboard. We put a whiteboard up in the actual where we gather for coffee and breaks, and then we've got the post-it notes of what actions are we going to do, which goes on the left-hand side, the to-do. What post-it notes we're actually working on, what improvements we're actually working on going to the middle, and then the far right-hand side is what's actually been completed. And what you're trying to do is trying to break your action plans down, so everyone's got a little bit of an action within the improvement plan itself. You know, the more people you get bought into this and involved in doing the actions and doing the improvements, the more chance you've got to get into that mindset of everybody challenging the amount of waste within the operation, and then getting together with these teams. It might only be 2 or 3 individuals, but getting those individuals together on a weekly basis, saying, right, what progress have we made? If we do have any spare time this week, what is it we're going to jump on, and what improvements are we actually going to make within the operation this week? So it's just a way of making the action plan as visual as possible. So whenever you've got a spare 1 hour, you've got an opportunity to do one of the improvements.
Yeah, sounds really sensible. We will now bring in some of our other guest speakers. Jamie, I see you've joined the call. Welcome. I don't know if you want to do a quick introduction of yourself, perhaps.
Hi, Linda. Thank you very much, and a fascinating presentation so far. Now it's lovely sort of watching what you're doing, and you started working with us must have been over 10 years ago, and just the basic principles of what you taught us has transformed the business, and we've moved it on and on in various different ways using lean techniques and other techniques to get a really good organized sort of management structure, which makes my life so much easier. I'm not on the farm at the moment. I'm actually on a Dyson farm, having a look round as part of the HDB strategic dairy farm plan. It's interesting just looking at how they're using these sort of techniques up here as well. Actually, they're obviously, Dyson being an engineer is very much looking down the technology side and using sort of lean processes to make the technology work in the right way as well. So that's absolutely fascinating. So please throw me any questions. Just to put it a bit more context, I'm an actor, a very diversified business now, and quite complex. So please throw me any questions, Neil, or anything you'd like me to answer or talk about in particular.
Yeah, Jamie, I remember you sent through to me your impossible vision, and I read through your impossible vision. I mean, yes, I love the title of it, what, but I love the ambition of the vision. But I also love the fact that you'd include into that quite a bit of talk about lean. So I mean, it's nice to see that you've took it on from being a tactical thing to actually being a strategic thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think since we've had that strategic vision, and it's only very simple, and I don't think business needs to get too high strategy, but I think it's important that it does have a direction which has got to be set up primarily by the owners, but needs buy-in from everybody who's in the business. But our strategic vision is to be the most productive farming business in the UK, and then we've got a bit on the end which goes naturally. And what we mean by that is we want to be the most productive farming business in the UK, which involves profitability, resilience, sustainability, and intuitiveness. We want all those things to be absolutely top notch, but we want to do it in a way that is it works naturally from an environmental point of view, but also naturally from a sort of team point of view, so that everybody knows what the next person's doing and how they fit into the team and what they can do to bring their part of it forward. So we tend to push as much control of the business down to the front line as we possibly can. So the guys who are actually milking the cows and doing that, we train them to the highest level we possibly can so they can do that job to the best they can and make their own decisions. because I don't want to be in a position where we've got 15 people working for us all in various different enterprises coming back to me all the time, so saying, how do we do this, what do we do now? So every time those sort of questions come up the tree, we push them back down and say, okay, so what do we need to learn, what do we need to train him, who needs to know what, who needs to be empowered to do what. So everything is run from the front line. And then underneath our vision statement, we have a mission statement, which is basically at the moment we're working on 3 different things. One of them is enhancing our natural assets, things like particular soil health is really key to maintaining the longevity of the farming business. So our nutrient management and everything else is lining into optimizing those, in enhancing those sort of natural assets. And then where lean comes in is our second one, which is very much all about optimizing inputs. So Neil mentioned earlier about using too much sawdust, or as now sand. So making sure that we're getting those absolutely 100% right, and focusing on that can save you absolutely thousands of pounds. But you can't just do it by sort of saying, oh, I just want to sort of save sand, because sand is the bedding we use for the cows, and if you put too little on, you're going to end up with a lot of mastitis in the cows and a lot of problems that way. So you have to optimize it. You have to find out what's the amount that you can almost get away with without causing yourself another problem. And I think all the methodology that lean goes into with the waste walks and actually looking at things as to how that happens is key to it's key to enabling that. So every time we do a project like looking at sand reduction or whatever it happens to be, we do what we call an estimate at completion document. So we sort of say, well, this is where we want to get to, this is how we want to get there, and this is how the money we think it's going to cost us to get there, and what it looks like at the end. And then we've got some, that's all I need to buy as documents. When we do projects, we've then got something I can learn on. So when it comes to the waste on conference, that would come as part of the estimate at the estimate completion document. So at the end of it, we can sort of say, well, he did this. This is what he said would happen. Now the project is over. What did actually happen? And the only purpose of that is to feed forward and learn how to do it better next time. It's never about you did it badly or you did it wrong in the past, because none of us can resolve that stuff. But it's all about feeding it forward. Okay, so this is what happened this time. Next time we do a wastewater, we'll have to look at it another way and think about maybe the psychology of the people that are doing it. One of the projects we did on the farm was to try and get sort of scrapers and everything in the right place for everybody, and we put quite a lot of effort into doing that, and then found that actually the team didn't really use it because it wasn't such a big deal that they needed to. They didn't mind walking a little bit to get their scrapers and bits and pieces. Things didn't need to be absolutely regimented as in the exact place that we thought they might be. So you have got to integrate the psychology a little bit with the sort of science and the logic. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely does make sense. I think we've talked quite a bit before about mindset, and I think you've by involving people the way you have involved people, I think that's the way to try and overcome some of the potential barriers and some of the resistance you can sometimes see to carrying out improvements. So I think you've worked very hard on that, and I think that's what's starting to generate the results.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and another thing that we do with the team is that all of their team are all on salary, and we have a rule that once the job is done and it's got to be done well, that's it. They can go home. So if you've got a team of people who are on salary, you'll be amazed at how well they work together to improve and get systems correct, because there's a reward from it at the end of it, i.e. they can get home to their families and have a longer time not at work.
And I think that on a small farm, not yours is a small farm, but I know a lot of people that'll be watching this that are on small farms. That to me is probably the biggest value. Freeing up your own individual time to spend more time with families is probably the biggest value you can get from this. So rather than working 18-hour days, if that can be knocked down to 15-hour days, then that extra time with the family is invaluable.
It's invaluable. Your staff turnover goes down. Everything you taught people is. I mean, we've got quite an experienced team there because the turnover is so slow. so low, almost too low in some respects. But they know what they're doing. It makes life very easy if people aren't coming and going all the time, because certainly if they're being overworked and they're leaving because of that's a waste. And I think it doesn't get accounted for. There's a whole, particularly in farming, there's a whole approach that, if you're not doing an 80-hour week, you're not working hard enough. That's not probably the best economic way of thinking about it, and actually it's self-perpetuating, because if you've got a high staff turnover, everybody's going to be working 80-hour weeks to recruit the new lot and train them up and do everything else. Whereas if you can get the efficiencies right and get the team rewarded because of the efficiencies, then it in my opinion, it works so much better.
Brilliant, Jamie. Thanks for that. That's a really good segue into you, Michael, because I remember as part of your podcast, you talk about the example of a farmer that used to keep his Wellingtons at the front door, and then that way, if anyone knocked on the door and he was in the kitchen having a break, because he felt so guilty, he could rush around, put his wellies on, and walk round the back of the farm, so it looked like he'd been working all the time.
Yeah. It was on the back. It is at the back door. So if someone it was terrible. And I see that. I know another chap that actually had a light switch timer in his shed, so it would go on at 6 o'clock. So all his neighbours thought he was up. That's your thing. There's a little bit of that, isn't there?
Well, I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem in this country, and I think it's definitely a problem within the industry, where people feel guilty if they're not working flat out all the time. And we talk about the mindset of improvements, and sometimes people feel like it's almost cheating when you knock out some of the waste and you make the process easier. They feel like, well, it should be difficult, shouldn't it? It should be more. It should take me a long time.
I do think that's a barrier to lean, actually.
Yeah.
I was telling my wife that we should move the fridge, and and it would save, I think, 2 minutes, but the number of times we go back and forth to the fridge, I think it added up to something like half a day a year, something like that. And but she thought I was mental, crazy thinking about that, and there was obviously an issue with me. Says more about my wife, I think.
Yeah. I'm not going to be drawn on this one.
You want to get involved in that one.
Quick, you want to tell us about your podcast?
Yeah, I didn't mention that at the start, actually. So I suppose the reason I'm here is that we did, I have a podcast called The Pasture Pod, and usually it's me singing my own theme tune, having a talking dog tell jokes, and do a long interview with the farmer. But we did a time series about time in farming, because I was convinced that it was a bigger issue than anyone, that we were acknowledging. And I did speak to farmers that did acknowledge it, but I also spoke to farmers that didn't. And so it was a 6-part series, a sort of documentary type thing. And we spoke to you, Neil, and we spoke to AP, Andrew Palmer, and about the lean project with pork, HDB pork. And so that interested me, and that has developed since, and I'm going to try and do another documentary podcast type thing on lean, and more on, I think lean actually puts some people off the thought of it, but I think it's absolutely to the core of what we are as farmers, and I don't think we realize it. So I think I'm going to sort of look at efficiency, and again, that's a kind of a word that gets a reaction as well. But yeah, it's not done yet. I'm ruminating on it. I'm getting a few interviews in the can, but I think it's such an interesting subject.
Well, it's interesting who you've spoken to on the way as well. And I mean, I don't know if anyone's listened to Michael's podcast. I'm sure you have, but there's a lot of people, a lot of experts, excluding myself. There's a lot of experts that you spoke to along the way, like Paul Akers and the Lean Made Simple guys. So what's been interesting for me is to see you get excited about the potential of this topic.
Yeah.
You've been doing your research.
Yeah, well, I tell you, my first reaction to speaking to you and Andrew was, that's not what I should be concentrating on. Make sure that I'm doing the right thing rather than doing things right. And I thought the lean thing was doing things right. You could do the wrong thing really well. And I'm sorry, Neil, I associated lean with that. That would be a danger of lean, but actually that's not true at all. And the further I've gone in, I spoke to, I'm not sure if anyone has come across Paul Akers, but he wrote a book called 2 Second Lean. And it basically, what he did was take the Toyota way and boil it down to really simple concepts. And even a 2-second improvement. I watched a YouTube video of Paul Akers and his staff taking a 45-second process down to 17 seconds. The whole video took 40 minutes. But if you, that was a repeatable process that saves so much time. And I'd spoke to Paul, and he basically made me realize that doing the podcast on lean management was high functioning procrastination. I was putting it off. And he said, you have got to, and he swore at me. He said, you've got to get your head out of your ass and do it yourself. And so it's really made me think, you know, I've actually got to do it. I'm just a small individual. So I'm a partner with my wife, but it's most of the jobs are just me. And I've taken videos of my sheds at the moment. I've sent them to Neil, and Neil had to be hospitalized because he was so aghast at how awful the sheds, how very messy they were. So I'm starting from a very low base, but I am a first generation farmer. The window of me farming isn't the generation before, and it won't be the generation after. This is the shot. I've only got one opportunity. If I want to be the best it can be, I have to actually look inside myself, address my weaknesses, and I'm sure, I'm convinced now that lean is really a vehicle to do that, because I'm great in the blue sky stuff and this, and I think the systems I'm okay at, but the actual operation of it is really a challenge for me. And I really need, if I want to be the best I can be, I really need to do this. So that's, yeah.
Tell us about how you went on with your waste walk.
Well, yeah, so what I did was actually, my son, we've got a better system in place as of yesterday, but 2 days ago, I put my camera phone into my vest pocket and started taking a video of moving the sheep. We knew you don't need to know the details, but it's slightly fragmented, our farm, but we need to move sheep across the road, which is always a point of friction. So I just thought I'd do it for there. And it was we ran out of video space, but it lasted for 40 minutes. We traveled 7 kilometers. Well, I did. And, you know, fiddling about, you know, mincing about, you know, sorting defects in the fence, opening gates. Some of the gates didn't open perfectly. And I've, you know, and a lot of traveling about. I needed 2 people to help me cross the road. That involved more time for people. People were waiting. People were, you know, the whole movement around the farm was significant. It was 65% of the time. Anyway, we moved the sheep across the road. That took 9% of the time. The whole rigmarole surrounding it was absolutely something that it's also scares me, because I'm not sure how to sort that. So you find out a problem, and I think that's what happens to some people, is that you know there's a problem, but you know that there might not be a solution. So that that is something. It's made me think a huge amount. It's just 2 days ago. So and it did take time, but you know, the video was really good. You just put it onto iMovie, and you've got the time, and you just, you know, you can speed up to the end of the process, and you know the time then, and you know, I watched Made in Chelsea whilst I was doing the spreadsheet. You know, you can get 2 good things in at once. And yes, so that it was actually all right. And I think I'm definitely going to do it again.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's where you get the value is when you repeat this and you keep going back and looking at different elements of the business and see where else you can apply it. And sometimes the improvements aren't immediately obvious. It's when you step back from it and a few days afterwards that the answers start to come through, and then you work out ways of trialing that. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate that. Linda, just conscious of the fact we were going to leave a little bit of time for questions.
I was going to say, yeah, we're running low on time, but before we move on to any questions, I was just going to say to everyone on this, there will be some downloadable PDFs that will be made available when we send out the recording as well. So if you want to start these waste walks yourselves, Neil has kindly put together some templates and tools for everyone to use, which is great. So we've only got about 3 minutes left. So we've just got a couple questions, if that's okay. If you all want to take a chance answering them, it would be great. But I think for me, it'd just be interesting to know, because this feels like still quite a new concept in this sector. What, in your experience, do you see the biggest mistakes people are doing when they kind of try and implement lean management? Is there sort of a top tip of what not to do when embarking on this process?
Yeah, I'd say not involving as many people as possible.
Okay.
So like doing the waste walk by yourself and then trying to impose the ideas that come out of this. Because if people don't see the problem themselves, they wonder why you want to change things. It's only when people experience it and see the waste walk and the 7 kilometres of walks and the amount of time lost on these kind of things, like watching the video back together and critiquing the video, that's when people start to get the reason for doing the change. If they feel like it's been imposed upon them, they'll naturally resist it.
Yeah. And I guess there is something in that, because coming from another sector myself, lean management can sometimes sound quite scary. And I don't know if you've had experience where teams or family members are really resistant to implementing this, because it sounds like, oh, am I going to be out of a job, or is this going to, impact me negatively somehow?
Yeah, and I think people have got that misconception that it's about cutting away. But it is about cutting away, but it's about cutting away the waste rather than the value add. So, and hopefully by taking out the waste, you actually make the job more enjoyable for individuals. And I think it's explaining that. Nobody really appreciates trying to hunt down a scraper or trying to find a broom or trying to manage sheep across the road. Those difficulties, that's what makes the job frustrating. People do actually enjoy the results that come from farming. So I think if once people start to realise it will free them up to spend more time on getting the results, then hopefully that's where those fears start to die away.
Yeah, great. Well, as we've got about 30 seconds left, I'm going to take the time just to say thank you very much to Jamie and Michael and to you, Neil, for taking the time today and educating all of us. I think we've all learned something, whether it's moving the fridge in our own kitchens or something of a bigger scale. So thank you very much for the time today, and for everyone listening, we'll get the recording sent out as soon as we can, and hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Michael.